focus on some different aspects of humanity and different aspects of psychology. So I think it focuses your perspective and you see things slightly differently than you would if you were a human factors and ergonomics researcher or a forensic psychology researcher or even outside of psychology. So for example, I focus a lot on motivational theories because they're big in IO psychology. So that plays a pretty significant role in how I see psychology in general. I look at internal or endogenously driven motivational factors and exogenous, and that comes up a lot. And biology for me, because there is a focus on the underlying physiology within my research field. I take a very heavy bio approach to psychology, right? Because you can there are so many different perspectives you can take, but from my viewpoint, you can boil everything down to brain activity, right? So I think that's going to be true no matter who you talk to. Their own field and their own research interests are gonna forge them into a specific perspective, and this is going to be true for everybody.
So I have an off-topic question. It's kind of a branch off. So you say you take a biological and a statistical approach to your work.
Yep.
What other approaches are there other than, like, what are some other patterns of thought that may not be yours, but what other patterns of thought do you think psychologists use in their work other than what you think?
Oh yeah, so some people take a very developmental, so our developmental folks will take a very lifespan approach and think about things in terms of more qualitative shifts and qualitative differences. So like that's a very big difference when you're talking about statistically. Their analytic styles are very different because they have to use qualitative tools. They're taking a more longitudinal approach, so their research looks different, and as a result, they think about things not like in terms of that longitudinal style, as opposed to this is what's happening right now, snapshot sort of viewpoint that you might take if you're a frequentist or a quantitative psychologist.
Okay,
so that's one example, but it really just like everybody's going to have a different viewpoint, right? If you're a clinician or you focus on abnormal, then you're probably going to focus on that a lot in your lectures and things like that as well. You're going to try to identify not the way that things work normally, but what happens when there's a distortion or what happens when things go wrong. So again, it really that perspective can greatly change the kind of delivery that you're going to get from a professor in a course.
Wow, thank you.
Yeah.
So since psychology is kind of like everyone mostly has to take it if they didn't take it in high school, kind of going off your teaching methods, how do you keep your students engaged in the material and something that where they want to show up for class?
Right. So I try to relate what I teach to their actual lives, which in psychology is pretty easy for the most part.
Very easy for college students.
Right. It's hard when you're talking about material like the stat stuff because so you have to kind of reach there and grab out for something. But for things like social psych, abnormal psych, everybody knows somebody that sleepwalks, or everybody knows somebody that's that's had something like sleep paralysis, and you get so you use examples like that and you relate that to your day-to-day life, and I think it's really a good way of teaching it in general. No matter what the topic area, as long as you can relate that to some experience that people have had. So I rely very heavily on that to try to get people engaged in the coursework. Beyond that, just high energy. If you don't want to go to a class where a professor is monotone and falling asleep. So
yeah, that's true.
So with your most recent thing you're teaching, can you give me an example of relating to the students with the content?
Yeah, so I'm teaching intro to psych right now. So that specific example of we're going through abnormal psychology right now, or clinical psychology. So I was giving multiple examples of very common ones. I related actually. So I suffer from depression and anxiety. So I was actually talking about that when we got to depression and anxiety, for example, about what that actual experience is like, not from the perspective of a clinician, but from the perspective of somebody that's experienced it.
Right.
And beyond that, talking about how everybody experiences some of these symptoms at some point, and what it takes to be able to diagnose somebody with something like depression or anxiety disorder, as opposed to you're just lacking motivation today or something like that.
Right.
So walking people through what normal is. It's there's normal is a terrible statement, but what adaptive and maladaptive behavior and experiences are like, and when we found what it takes to cross into diagnosable, and I think using those kinds of examples really ties that kind of stuff in. So that's one that I just used, for example, last class.
Perfect.
So, but I use a lot of stuff like that.
Okay.
when I lecture about behavioral or endogenously driven behaviors, like eating and drinking, everybody does that. But you can talk about, have you ever felt like when your stomach rumbles and you feel really hungry? Well, then you can talk about the neurotransmitter that makes that happen and actually triggers hunger up in your brain.
Wow.
Right.
Yeah.
So all these kinds of experiences that you have, now you have a little bit more of an understanding of what's going on there,
Right.
and so I try to use a lot of that.
Thank you.
So other than teaching, what else could you do with a psychology degree?
There are a lot of applied areas, but there's so much variance in what psychology is, right? So, forensic psychology, you could work in the court system, you could work in a law office, you could work in a judicial office. So those are
Wow,
three, just for forensic psychology. Clinicians, obviously, they can work in private practices, mental health facilities, counseling centers, schools. You have those. Most of these require advanced degrees to do the advanced stuff, but you could work as a social worker with a degree in psychology. You can get pretty far in human resources, but with the more advanced degrees, you can run entire human resources departments. You can run organizational research departments in some of the biggest companies in the world, right? So there are so many possibilities that you have with a psychology degree. It opens up a lot of doors, in part because we're talking about people, right? And all of your experiences, every job is going to be interacting with almost every job.
Yeah.
It's going to
Right.
be involved
Yes, sir.
interacting with people in some way. So there are just a lot of opportunities to take advantage of psychology. Some really cool ones. I mean,
Yeah.
I love biopsychology. That's my field. I've taken a more quantitative approach now with the data science. But you can get into, especially if you focus on the quantitative side. I'm in like a hybrid, non-existent real role. Like. So where I'm a hybrid consultant and data scientist, right? So again, if you have that background knowledge, it opens so many doors for things that you can do later on.
Interesting. So, when did you get your degree in psychology? When was like the year you graduated?
High school, 2000. High school. College was 2011. Undergrad, and I'm a 7th-year graduate student here.
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
So, with that knowledge, how do you plan to further your career in psychology? What else do you want to do? Do you want to branch off and how do you plan to further your career?
So obviously, I already have the position as a data scientist at Red Hat. But beyond that, starting to take a more consultative approach within the organization. So I'm going to be starting an IO, because we have a lot of IO psychologists there.
Yeah.
Starting an IO consulting group, where we can reach out to different parts of the org and help them move the org forward. As an aside, Red Hat is such an amazing company with the open source and the things that they do for society. So finding work like that and being able to make the world, like the whole reason I got into IO psychology, to make the world a better place, by using these skills that I have and the things that I've learned in psychology. So that's a little bit short term, midterm, and then long term, really creating a consulting group, combining that consulting and analytics.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, you obviously seem very passionate about your work. So this leads to this question: what are the moral issues that are important to you and other scholars in your field? Like, what hits you the most?
With this knowledge, we have a lot of power to influence, right? And it has historically played a very big role in a lot of negative things. So I don't know. Have you guys heard of the Lynchburg Colony? So it was the Lynchburg Colony for the Feeble-Minded in Lynchburg, Virginia, and this is not that long ago. This is not. It was formed in the 1930s into the 1940s. But what they did was they used intelligence tests on people locally. If they had scored really low, they would bring them in and forcibly sterilize them.
Wow.
So it's the eugenics movement, right? This was a significant part of the eugenics movement. So what they were doing is misusing our understanding of intelligence testing for their own personal gain, right? And their own perceived moral power to eliminate the dregs of society. So we have that capability, right? We have these understandings of how people function from a mental perspective. We can make misdiagnoses. All these labels that come with academic psychology or clinical psychology carry a lot of weight. So we need to be very careful in how we assign labels, in how we drive people to behave, in how we ask people questions about themselves, in how we use our ability to influence Like it sounds silly, but there is a significant amount of knowledge to have that kind of influence, and it's been bastardized into things like advertising came out of psychology, right? So there is a psychology of
absolutely.
advertising. One of the bigger applied psychology researchers basically created this whole area, and now we have ads everywhere, having a significant influence. Whether or not we think we're influenced by ads, we are significantly, right? So trying to move away from stuff like that and get back toward the roots of doing good things. Like I said, that's the reason I got into psychology is to do good things for people, to make people's lives better. But you can do other things with it, unfortunately.
All right, well, this question is a little more lighthearted. This is the last question. What is something about, excuse me, what is something about the psychology department that we would not be able to find online? So something we wouldn't know about the psychology department that you'd like to share.
I have no idea.
I know, it's a weird question.
There's a lot of stuff missing online. A little fun factoid, I don't know about...
That's basically what we're looking for.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's
Fun
basically
fact.
something
So
like
this
that, yeah.
floor used to house a ton of animals.
Really?
Yeah, so there was a lot of animal behavioral research, well, just behaviorism in general.
Uh-huh.
That was really big into the 70s and 80s. So in most of these rooms, they would have cages and cages of rats and other animals.
That's so fun.
729 in there actually still had, like, there were weird experiments being run over there. But 729, which is our grad TA lounge, has this massive, like, because it's too big to remove now, silent thing with what looks like a vault door from a bank or something like that. It's like this thick, and when you close it, you can't hear anything outside.
That's crazy.
Yeah,
That's really
so
weird.
it's just cool to see the remnants of old research.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a ton of like this whole floor was just filled with animals.
That's hilarious.
That's
and-
crazy.
Yeah. Wow, that's perfect.
But it shows how psychology changes over time, and the
method.
it's a fickle field, so to speak.
Yeah.
But behaviorism was really big before that. Motivation was really big. Now it's cognition and development and aging. IO psychology has we take a lot of stuff from different areas because we're a very applied field. But the more purely research fields like developmental psychology, they change over time. They change focus. So you see that kind of research change over time. So what you see now probably won't be the same as what you see in 15 or 20 years in Poe Hall, at least on this floor.
Yeah, it's really neat.
Sorry, can you repeat that about?
Oh, I'm recording. You're good.
Oh, okay.
Thanks, bud.
My bad.
Nice.
I figured that'd be a good idea, like in the third question. So, that was the last question. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your field that you want
I mean,
to let people know?
I love IO psychology, so that's in general. I think psychology gets pretty significantly misunderstood,
Uh-huh.
right? Because there's like in the media you see these Freudisms and things like that.
Yeah.
I spend maybe 30 minutes talking about Freud in an entire semester.
Really?
I don't like talking about him at all, but I kind of feel like I have to.
Yeah, because when people think psychology, they just automatically associate
Right.
with Freud's.
But
Yeah.
there's so much more. Like my field, most people don't know about my field existing at all, which is industrial and organizational psych.
Yeah.
But things like forensic psychology, human factors, and ergonomics, HFE is so cool. Like you are actually developing research and helping design things like robots effectively, so we can improve human-robot interaction. Huge line of research going on in this building right now
Wow.
in terms of how we interact with robots, how we perceive them, how we relate to them as they become more human. But even then, it's not non-human robots. We develop attachments to drones. Drone operators develop emotional attachments to their drones. Right.
Whoa, that's
So
really cool.
so all of that kind of stuff, you don't see that in the media, but it's an aspect of
Right.
psychology that's
Uh-huh.
that's big, and it has a big significant influence. So
Absolutely.
that's part of why I love psychology. There's these secrets that you discover as you get into
Yeah.
it.
Yeah,
But
absolutely.
as you learn more about psych, it's much more than just laying on a couch and talking about your problems.
Right.
It's
you have
so
to
much
break
more.
the stereotype, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
That's perfect.
That's really great.
That's all we
yeah.
got. That's all we got.
Well, if you guys have any more questions at any point, just let me know. Send me an email. I can add clarifications if you
Sure.
need me to.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Um,
much.
yeah, no
Really-
problem.
We
Thank you for
really
your time.
appreciate it.
Hopefully, you guys crush your
Thank
project.
you so
project.
much.